if you're going to do great things in life, which I actually believe that all of us have the potential to do, it's just that a lot of people have refused to reduce their ignorance. In fact, I believe that we don't increase wisdom as much as we reduce ignorance. So all of these commendable things that we do in the pursuit of knowledge, watching things like this, reading books, it's not so much to increase wisdom itself, but to reduce ignorance. So all of us are potentialed to do great things in life. But if you're going to achieve that, then you are most likely going to go through a period in your life where you do not know what your life is about or what you're supposed to do. You're literally going to get to a point where you're going to sing like King Sunny Ade. Eshu biribiri kebo mi o, biwaju loloko iwa mi lo, beyin loloko iwa mi lo, mi o mo ye o, mi o mo, which literally means that I don't know whether my life is moving forward or going backward. You're going to get to a point where even though it is obvious to you and everyone else how gifted you are, you will think and feel like the most confused and frustrated person on the face of the earth. The problem is that the more gifted you are, the more confused you're likely to be as to what exactly to do with your life. I know, it seems very counterintuitive. Yeah, because on the surface, it will seem as if the more gifted anybody is, then the more options they have, and so the better their lives, right? We even say that about money. We say that the advantage of having money is that you have options, you have more options, so you can pick and you can choose. But as anybody who is multi-potentialed can tell you, multi-potentialed, we call people who have the potential to do several things very well, we call them multi-potentialites. That is, multiple potentials. So anybody who is multi-potentialed can easily tell you that the more options you have as to what to do with your life, the more confusion you will face, for the simple reason that your mind will play tricks on you. Your mind and the resistant force in your mind will play many tricks on you. Think about it. If you have only one outstanding gift or one path and can only do one thing very well, then there's no problem, is there? You have only one way to go. You have only one option. If you have only one person who is interested in dating or marrying you, then it is clear who you're going to date or marry, isn't it? I choose you, my love. Well, I guess you do. I'm your only option. But when you have quite a few people, really great suitors who are interested in dating or marrying you, then choosing whom to marry becomes a significant problem. More options, more problems. Or in the words of Notorious B.I.G., more money, more problems. And the best example I can give you off the top of my head right now is Netflix. There are about 10,000 titles on Netflix at any point in time. Movies, shows, documentaries, music, stand-up comedy, games, and so on. And yet, have you ever spent days scrolling through Netflix and going, shoot, there is nothing to watch? Am I the only one? 10,000 great titles and nothing to watch. What about Hulu? 5,000 titles on Hulu with live TV and nothing to watch. Hundreds of books in the library, nothing to read. Refrigerator stacked up with food and yet nothing to eat. Which is ironic, because back in the day when all we had was live TV and just a few television stations, we had no problems with what to watch. TV was no more boring or no more engaging than it is today. So more isn't always better. And if you're a multi-potential person, the chances are that you might just be a very frustrated person. So the question is, how does one find clarity exactly? Well, let us use the example of one of the most confused young men in history, David. The David, the one who would go on to become the king of Israel, that guy, King David. And no matter how you feel about religion, I want to encourage you to continue to listen to this. This is not about preaching, because when people hear about the Bible, then they run. I mean, look at me. Do I come across as your pastor? Do I look like your pastor? There is a big and common misconception about the story of David when it comes to when Prophet Samuel, or when Samuel the prophet, when he went to anoint David as king while he was in his father's house. And it is so powerful that when you see that misconception, it completely changes the way that you see the story of David. You see, contrary to what you might have been taught or told, or what you might believe about what actually happened in the story, Samuel the prophet did not actually tell anybody that God had sent him to anoint David as king of Israel. No, he didn't tell David. He didn't tell David's father, not David's brothers, not any of the townspeople, not any of the elders who were gathered. Nobody. Read the story again. Nobody knew that David had been anointed as king that day. They knew that he had been anointed as something, but they did not know what he had been anointed as or what it was for. I mean, think about it. Why would they think that? They already had a king, Saul, and nobody knew that God had rejected Saul as king. Because contrary to how you might have envisioned or read the story, when God told Samuel to go and tell Saul that he was no longer king, it was in private that Samuel conveyed that message to Saul. In fact, it was so private that after delivering the message to Saul, Saul, the now rejected king, still asked Samuel to go out with him in public so that the people would still think that he, Saul, was king. And Samuel obliged him. Samuel did that. So, as far as everyone knew, Saul was still king. Samuel anointing David, as far as they were concerned, was for something else, and it definitely was a mystery. Maybe it was to be some sort of priest, maybe to be a prophet, perhaps even succeed Samuel himself, because Samuel was getting along in age at that point. Maybe it was to be a special kind of holy warrior. You know, this was a young nation. Nobody knew, but nobody thought that it was to be king. Saul had sons. They would assume that it was going to be, from father to son, it was going to be Jonathan. Think about it for another minute. If Samuel had announced to everyone when he anointed David as king that he was anointing him as king, do you not think that the news would have reached Saul immediately, and that Saul would have immediately killed both Samuel and David? In fact, that was exactly what Samuel said to God when God told him to go and anoint David as king in the first place. He said, Saul will kill me. If Saul hears about this, he will kill me. And then God gave him the sacrifice subterfuge strategy. Tell them that you're coming to offer a sacrifice instead. Nobody, least of all David, knew what he had been anointed to be. So he went back to doing what he was doing before Samuel came along and anointed him, which was being a shepherd. He was a shepherd boy. Now, I have told you all of this to set the scene, because here we have David. He could write poetry, as you can see from the Psalms, a lot of which he wrote while he was yet a shepherd. He could play the harp. In fact, he could play the harp so well that they sent for him from the palace to come and play the harp for the king. You know what that made him? The best harp player in the whole country. So he could have easily become a musician. That's number one. Or number two, he could write poetry, he could play the harp. That's 1 and 2. And then he was a very skilled fighter. In fact, he was a projectile warrior, perhaps the best projectile warrior who lived in his day. And everybody knows the story of David and Goliath and how he killed a giant with a slingshot. He could have been a soldier, a projectile warrior. In fact, he did become a soldier in the army after killing Goliath. So that is skill number 3, projectile warrior. And then, at the very least, he was a skilled shepherd. He was a skilled shepherd who was killing lions and bears all by himself, and he didn't lose one single sheep. That is skill set number 4. And now, on top of all of that, Samuel had anointed him for some secret and prestigious role that no one knew what for, or no one knew what it was about, but it was surely for something great. Samuel the prophet just didn't show up anywhere for no reason. The story says that when Samuel showed up in the town, the elders of the town were very afraid and worried, and they started asking him, we hope everything is okay. I mean, Samuel, a whole Samuel coming to our town. So Samuel anointed David, or Samuel anointing David, was a big deal, even though it was a mystery destiny or for a mystery cause. So that is number 5. Options, options, options. And yet he was sent back to the lowly position of being a shepherd boy taking care of his father's sheep. Can you imagine if that was you or I? Life just took you up in front of everyone, only to throw you down again in front of everybody. After all of your confusion about what to do with your life, seeing how you could write poetry, you could play the harp, you were a skilled projectile warrior, you could be a great shepherd, you didn't know what to do, and then the universe seemed to answer your prayers, only for the excitement to fizzle out and for you to find yourself back where you started, which now was worse because now you know that you have a great destiny since the great prophet has anointed you, but you have no way to fulfill your potential, and to make matters worse, you don't even know what you're supposed to be fulfilling since you can do many things and several things very well. So how do you keep your sanity through all of this emotional roller coaster? How do you not only stop yourself from going mad or insane trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, but how are you also supposed to feed yourself and your family? Questions. Well, to be frank, even I am still in the process of mastery of this riddle, but I know enough now to not only get you started, but to also give you momentum and vanquish the frustration that is threatening to destroy you, because that's what it's actually threatening to do. It's threatening to destroy you. And here's the best answer that I have found through my experience. Just do everything. And I don't know if you've noticed, but that is exactly what I'm doing in front of you right now. That's how I am unfolding in front of you. One day, you will see me interviewing someone on my podcast. The next, you will see me doing this, encouraging somebody with a message. The day after that, you might see me act in a movie. The day after that, you might see me on stage telling jokes, doing stand-up comedy. And then the day after that, you might see me MC some big event in town. And then I rinse and repeat and do it all over again while adding other stuff. Because all of those things are just gifts and expressions of my talent or my calling, if you like. My calling or talent is to change lives using my gift of the gab or the talent of speaking. Hence the title, King of Talk. All these things that I do are just expressions or gifts of the talent. But here is the key, and I wrote it in my first book, The Secrets of the Streets, and you can find it on Amazon now. The link is in my bio. The trick to doing everything is not to try to do everything at once, at least not in the beginning. As I wrote in my book, start with the lowest hanging fruit. If you are a multi-potentialite or someone who can do many things very well, I promise you that there is a common denominator to all of your gifts, and that denominator is like a tree which has many fruits growing on it, fruits growing on many branches. Those fruits are your expressions or your gifts. What you need to do is to reach out for the closest one and grasp it. For me, when I was ready to emerge from my cocoon after my recent period of silence, the question was, which of these several things that I can do very well is the lowest hanging fruit, which can yield the greatest impact with the least amount of effort, relatively speaking. And that was running a podcast. Why? Because I had already spent over 10 years running one of the biggest talk shows in Africa. So a podcast was little work compared to that, relatively speaking. And now, once we got that podcast to where it is almost automated now, where there's a team taking care of stuff, I am beginning to put out these types of messages more and more every day. You see, you're getting them more frequently now, yeah? And then I am hitting the road very soon to do some stand-up comedy and so on and so forth. I'm beginning to grab the fruits one at a time, starting with the one nearest my reach or nearest to my grasp. So I say the same thing to you now. Stop the confusion with trying to pick just one thing that you believe you must do. Just accept that you're going to do everything or that you're going to do many things. So the question now becomes, which of these several things that you can do should you start doing first? David used all his gifts at the same time. He was a shepherd boy who was writing poetry and playing the harp and using his sling and taking care of the sheep all at the same time. I have no doubt that he started with one first and then moved to the others until he got really proficient at all of them. And then they noticed him and he became the king's musician and moved into the palace. But the Bible records that he was still doing his shepherd work on the side. In fact, on the day that he killed Goliath, it was from his duty as a shepherd that his father sent him to take food to his brothers on the battlefront. And then the moment that he killed Goliath, he became a soldier in Saul's army while he was still the king's musician, but now he was no longer his shepherd boy. He dropped that fruit. And then he would go on to become a captain. He would go on to become captain of hundreds of men in the army, and then he no longer played the harp for the king. And then eventually he became king himself, which was his ultimate destiny for which Samuel had anointed him. So you see, as he proceeded upward, he started discarding the gifts that he had used one after the other, even though they were always with him. He discarded them until he became king, his ultimate destiny, but he never turned his back on any of his gifts as far as we know. I want to believe that he still played the harp in the palace for the enjoyment of himself and probably his family. He gave all his gifts expression. Do the same thing now. Don't let the resistance that lives in you or within you frustrate you with all the options that you have at your disposal. Your options are a blessing, they're not a curse, and they are not a burden. Treat them that way, like a blessing, and give all of them your expression, and start with the most accessible one. All right, that's it. I'll see you on the next one.